full-time female attendants, Vicky, Karen, and Roberta Hedges.
And before you can hear a sound, he's got your picture down.
Sure, I must be fit to be a milkman, as Nick and Kate are finding out.
Do you remember those 1970s things we all swore were perfectly normal? Until they were gone? Back then, they were part of daily life, so ordinary we barely noticed them. What changed to turn something so familiar into a memory we can't quite let go? Waterbeds in every bedroom were once the epitome of 1970s cool. If you walked into a friend's house and they had one, you automatically assumed they were living the dream. The glossy vinyl surface stretched over a sloshing pool of heated water felt futuristic, like sleeping on a wave. People swore it was better for your back, more comfortable than any mattress, and, let's be honest, just more fun. Some had elaborate headboards with built-in mirrors, shelves, or even radios. Couples liked to show them off during house parties, letting guests try the gentle rocking motion for themselves. Kids would sneak in and bounce on them, sending waves across the entire surface. Pet owners learned quickly that cats and waterbeds were a dangerous combination. In furniture ads, they were often paired with mood lighting and thick shag rugs, selling a whole lifestyle rather than just a place to sleep. The rhythmic motion could lull you to sleep or keep you awake, depending on how steady the bed frame was. And of course, the whole thing came with its own electric heater, so the bed was always warm when you slid under the covers. It seemed glamorous until the first leak. One tiny puncture and you were frantically mopping up gallons of water in the middle of the night. Mold, heavy lifting, awkward sheet fitting, none of that crossed your mind in the showroom. Yet in the 1970s, nobody questioned it. A waterbed was a status symbol, a conversation starter, and the final touch in a bedroom that probably also had shag carpeting and mirrored closet doors. Pay toilets in public places were an accepted fact of life in the 1970s. You carried a dime in your pocket or purse specifically for restroom access. Malls, bus stations, even some restaurants had coin-operated locks on their bathroom doors. Nobody thought twice about it. You needed to go, you paid the toll. Some of these locks had a polished chrome plate and a little window that flipped from vacant to occupied. If you were short on change, you might have to beg a stranger for a coin or run to a vending machine to break a bill. The stalls themselves were often narrow and cramped, adding to the rush to get in and out. Attendants sometimes patrolled high-traffic restrooms to keep the lines moving. Travelers often swapped stories about the strangest pay toilets they had encountered on their routes. It was so common that kids were taught to always have bathroom change on them. For women, it meant digging through a handbag in a hurry. For men, it was often a scramble at the change machine. The metal doors would clink open once you fed the coin, and if you forgot to latch it quickly, someone might push right in. There was a brief industry around making keys that bypassed the locks, a quiet rebellion against the idea of paying for a basic human need. Laws eventually banned pay toilets, calling them discriminatory, but in their time, they were simply part of navigating the day. The sound of that dime dropping into the slot is still vivid to anyone who grew up with them. Smoking sections in restaurants were as ordinary as menus. You would walk in and be asked, smoking or non-smoking, as if that thin, imaginary boundary between tables could contain a cloud of cigarette smoke. Families sat eating pancakes, omelets, and hamburgers while nearby diners lit up without a second thought. The smell of coffee often mingled with tobacco in a way that now seems absurd, but then felt normal. Menus sometimes even had ash burns from carelessly flicked embers. Servers carried extra ashtrays stacked in one hand, swapping them out with practiced efficiency when one became too full. Cigarette machines often stood right by the entrance, so people could buy a fresh pack on their way in. In some diners, the non-smoking section was just the two tables furthest from the door. You could watch the smoke drift upward, swirling in the air vents overhead. Ashtrays were part of the table setting, often heavy glass or metal, and waitresses would sweep them away with the same casualness as a used plate. Kids colored on placemats while their parents smoked, and no one thought twice about the haze drifting through the room. Even in fast food restaurants, there were designated smoking areas. You might walk past the section on your way to the counter, passing rows of people chatting with lit cigarettes over trays of fries. It was just the rhythm of eating out. and nobody realized or admitted how strange it was until years later when the air finally cleared. School film strips with the beep sound were a hallmark of 1970s classrooms. The lights would dim, the projector would hum, and a frame-by-frame lesson would flicker onto the pull-down screen. Teachers would sit at the back, waiting for that unmistakable beep to signal a turn of the knob to the next slide. The sound was sharp, mechanical, and oddly satisfying. The film reels sometimes squeaked or stuck, making the teacher jiggle the machine until it ran smoothly again. Students would groan if the lights came back on mid-presentation because of a jam. Occasionally, a class clown would reach the projector first and flip through slides too fast, to everyone's laughter. Some film strips came with accompanying booklets, so students could follow along or take notes. The occasional upside-down or backward slide was met with a mix of giggles and sighs. Film strips covered everything from science lessons to health class, sometimes narrated in that calm, slightly detached voice that seemed to be in every educational video of the time. For students, it was a break from reading or worksheets, a chance to just watch and listen. Sometimes the teacher would forget to advance the frame, leaving everyone staring at the same image while the narration carried on awkwardly. Other times, they would turn it too soon, spoiling the visual reveal. The whole process was slow, analog, and clunky, but back then, it was considered cutting-edge classroom technology. Avocado green and harvest gold kitchens were the reigning champions of 1970s interior design. These two bold colors covered refrigerators, ovens, dishwashers, countertops, and sometimes even the sink. Cabinets were often dark wood, making the colors pop even more. It was considered modern, earthy, and full of warmth, a perfect palette for a decade obsessed with natural tones. Walking into one felt cozy but also striking, like stepping into a photograph from a glossy home magazine. The tones seemed to glow under warm kitchen lighting, especially during evening family dinners. The appliances were built to last, so these colors stuck around in homes well into the 1980s and beyond. Matching your blender, toaster, and coffee maker to your oven was a mark of style. Even the wallpaper and linoleum would often carry hints of avocado or gold, creating a complete visual theme. Today, it might look loud, even a little oppressive, but in its heyday, it was the height of kitchen fashion. Walking into one of these kitchens felt like stepping into the pages of a 1970s magazine ad. 8-track tape collections in cars were the pride of many drivers in the 1970s. These chunky cartridges slid into a player with a satisfying clunk, ready to deliver music for the road ahead. They were often stored in special carrying cases that sat between the front seats or on the floor. The sound quality was warm, if a bit muffled, and you learned to live with the fact that tracks would sometimes switch mid-song. There was something almost ceremonial about picking the next tape, like choosing the mood for the next stretch of road. The click of the player changing programs mid-verse was both frustrating and oddly endearing. Friends would trade tapes like baseball cards, comparing collections and bragging about rare finds. Road trips were planned with a soundtrack in mind, stacking your favorite tapes in the order you wanted to hear them. There was no quick skipping around, just 4 programs to choose from and a button to jump between them. The 8-track was part of the journey, a mechanical partner to every mile you traveled. CB radio craze swept across the country in the 1970s, and it was not just for truckers. Suburban dads, teenagers, even homemakers had CB radios installed in their cars or set up at home. Everyone had a handle, a nickname for on-air chatter, and learned the lingo. 10-4, breaker 1-9, and so on. You could tune in to local conversations, call for directions, or just listen for entertainment. It gave people a sense of belonging to a larger network, even if they had never met face-to-face. Conversations could be playful, helpful, or surprisingly personal, creating friendships that existed entirely over the airwaves. Some people became so hooked that they left their CB on all day, chatting with the same voices like a neighborhood meeting that never ended. The radios themselves had a rugged, techie appeal, with chrome knobs and glowing displays. For a while, it felt like a whole hidden world had opened up, one where anyone could join in just by picking up the mic. Payphones on every corner were an essential part of life. They stood in glass booths at gas stations, outside grocery stores, and along busy sidewalks. You always kept a dime, or later a quarter, in your pocket in case you needed to make a call. The smell of metal and disinfectant hit you as soon as you stepped inside, shutting the folding door behind you. Hearing the steady hum of the line before dialing was a little reassurance that you were connected to the world. Sometimes you could still see fingerprints on the glass from the last hurried caller. You would flip through the thick phone book hanging from a chain, dial the number, and listen to the steady click of the rotary or the muted beep of the keypad. Rain drumming on the glass, city noise muffled outside, the payphone felt like a tiny private room in the middle of the world. Nobody questioned their presence. They were just part of the landscape. Polaroid instant cameras at parties were a kind of magic. You aimed, clicked, and outslid a square of photo paper that developed right in your hand. The smell of the chemicals, the faint warmth of the picture. It was all part of the charm. People would gather around, watching the image slowly appear like a secret being revealed. Every shot felt precious because the film was expensive, and you only had so many tries. Friends would sometimes fight gently over who got to keep the best picture from the stack. Polaroids were passed around for laughs, pinned to bulletin boards, or stuck in scrapbooks with handwritten captions. You had to be careful not to smudge the picture before it dried, and shaking it in the air became an unofficial ritual, even if it did nothing to speed things up. In a world where photos usually meant waiting days for film to be processed, this felt instant, high-tech, and wildly fun. TV stations signing off at midnight was just how the day ended. After the late-night movie or the last news broadcast, a solemn voice would announce the station was going off the air. The national anthem played, sometimes over waving flags or scenic landscapes, and then the screen would go to static. If you were still awake, you might stare at the fuzzy snow for a while before turning the set off. It created a clear boundary between night and morning, something that feels missing in the endless stream of content today. For night owls, the moment was almost bittersweet, a reminder that the day had truly run its course. There was no 24-hour programming, no all-night talk shows, just a hard stop until morning. It was a quiet, final moment that made the whole house feel still. Waking up the next day and hearing the morning news felt like the world was starting fresh again. Water fountains with metal spigots were an unquestioned part of public life in the 1970s. They sat in schools, parks, and municipal buildings lined up against walls or bolted into concrete. You would press the little button and lean forward, putting your lips right on the cold metal nozzle without a second thought. There was no hand-wringing over germs. Nobody carried sanitizing wipes or personal water bottles. The taste was always the same, faintly metallic, icy, and slightly over-chlorinated. If you were lucky, you caught it when the water was at its coldest, straight from underground pipes. Sometimes kids would playfully cover the spout with their thumb, sending an arc of water over the next person in line. In summer, the area around the fountain was often muddy from all the dripping and splashing, making it just another part of its charm. On hot days, kids would crowd around one, taking turns and splashing water on their faces. The fountains were built to last, solid and unmovable, often with a chipped enamel coating from years of use. Sometimes the water pressure would shoot up like a geyser. Other times it would barely trickle, forcing you to practically kiss the fixture to get a sip. Looking back, it is amazing how normal it felt to share the exact same drinking spot with dozens, maybe hundreds, of strangers every day. Pong machines in pizza parlors were nothing short of mesmerizing when they first appeared. You would walk into a dimly lit restaurant, smell the yeasty dough baking, and hear the clink of quarters as kids lined up for a turn. The screen was simple, just a black background with two white paddles and a square ball that bounced from side to side. Families would gather around, cheering each hit like it was a championship match. The game felt futuristic, like something beamed in from a space station. The controls were smooth but stubborn, requiring a firm twist to move the paddle just right. Players quickly developed rivalries, challenging each other between bites of pizza. Even adults, pretending not to care, would eventually take a turn and get hooked. You slid the metal knob left and right, trying to outmaneuver your opponent, and the slow beep, beep, beep filled the air between bites of pepperoni. Pizza grease on your fingers did not slow you down. For many, this was their first experience with a video game, a moment when food and entertainment merged in a way that made pizza parlors a destination. Public ashtrays the size of bird baths were everywhere, in malls, airports, hospital lobbies, and bus terminals. These giant metal or ceramic bowls stood waist-high, filled with sand or gravel to hold thousands of cigarette butts. People would stop mid-stride, flick their ashes, and drop the glowing stub without missing a beat in conversation. Some ashtrays were plain and functional. Others had ornate stands or polished brass finishes. The smell was a constant mix of stale smoke and burning tobacco. Children sometimes played in the sand without realizing what it was, running their hands through it until a parent yanked them away. A newly raked ashtray had a strange, almost pristine look, gone in minutes once the crowd returned. In some places, the ashtrays doubled as informal meeting points, a spot where smokers knew they could always find each other. Nobody thought it odd that these stood in the middle of high-traffic areas, sometimes right next to children's play spaces. The sand would be raked smooth by maintenance crews in the morning, only to be littered again by lunchtime. It was just another fixture of public life, a quiet acceptance that smoking belonged everywhere. Car dashboard cigarette lighters were standard in every vehicle, tucked neatly beside the radio or glove compartment. You pushed the knob in, waited for it to pop out with a soft click, and then pulled it to reveal the glowing orange coil. It was instant fire on demand, no matches needed. Even non-smokers used them, for melting the ends of frayed shoelaces, sealing plastic packaging, or lighting fireworks. The lighter socket doubled as a power source for early gadgets, but back then it was designed purely for cigarettes. The coil gave off a faint heat for a few seconds after use, tempting curious fingers to test it, often with painful results. The smell of hot metal mixed with tobacco smoke created a signature scent inside older cars. Some drivers even kept extra lighters in case one wore out, treating them like a small but vital car accessory. Ashtrays were built right into the dash or armrest, and the faint smell of burnt tobacco seemed to live in the car permanently. It is hard to imagine now, but every family sedan came with everything you needed to light up while driving the kids to school. Encyclopedia salesmen going door to door were a common sight in the suburbs. Dressed in a suit, carrying a heavy leather case, they would introduce themselves with a friendly smile and a promise to bring the world into your home. Inside were glossy sample pages from a 26-volume set showing everything from ancient history to the solar system. Parents felt it was their duty to invest. Owning a full set of encyclopedias meant you cared about your children's education. The books were expensive, but they were marketed as a one-time purchase that would serve the family for decades. The salesman's pitch often included dramatic page turns and colorful illustrations to win over the kids. Some parents would negotiate on the doorstep, trying to lower the cost or spread it over more payments. Delivery day was an event, with the boxes carefully unpacked and the matching spines lined up in perfect order. Salesmen had polished pitches, complete with payment plans and glowing testimonials. Once delivered, the matching volumes would take up an entire shelf, a source of pride in the living room or den. Long before the internet, this was how you looked up anything, and the smell of the ink and paper was part of the experience. Milk delivery in glass bottles was still a familiar routine for many households in the 1970s. Early in the morning, the milkman would pull up in his truck, often wearing a crisp uniform and cap. He would collect the empties from your porch and leave fresh bottles, cold from the truck's insulated compartments. The thick glass kept the milk chilled and gave it a taste that cardboard cartons could never match. Many families had a special metal or wooden milk box by the door, designed to keep deliveries safe from animals and weather. Some milkmen would even take special orders for cream, butter, or eggs, scribbling notes on the side of the crate. Kids learned to recognize the sound of the truck's brakes as the signal to race out and say hello. On frigid mornings, frost would bead on the glass, making the bottles look like something out of a winter postcard. In summer, you had to bring them in quickly before the sun warmed them. Cream floated to the top, and you shook the bottle before pouring. Kids loved peeling back the little cardboard cap to sneak a drink straight from the bottle. The clink of glass on the porch was a comforting sound, a signal that the day had begun. Over time, home delivery faded away, but for those who grew up with it, the memory is tied to a sense of care and personal connection that grocery store milk just cannot match. Outdoor phone booths with folding doors were tiny glass sanctuaries in the middle of busy streets. You would step inside, pull the door closed, and suddenly the noise of traffic and wind dulled to a muffled hum. The phone was mounted on a metal shelf, often with a little space to rest your notepad or change. At night, the booth glowed softly under its own light, like a beacon for anyone needing to call home. In winter, the inside could be slightly warmer than the air outside, making it a welcome stop during a long walk. Some booths had graffiti scratched into the glass, telling silent stories of people who had passed through. Others had business cards, lost notes, or folded paper stuffed between the frame and the wall. The coins you dropped into the slot made a satisfying clink, a sound you could hear even through the phone's earpiece. If you were short on change, you might just call collect and hope the person answered. The smell inside was a mix of metal, dust, and faint cigarette smoke. On rainy days, the glass would fog up as you talked, making the booth feel even more private. Even though people could see you, it felt like your own little world for a few minutes. TV guides on every coffee table were as essential as the remote control is today. These small, colorful booklets listed every program for the week ahead, complete with synopses and times. Families would flip through, marking must-watch shows and circling special broadcasts. You planned your evenings around those listings. Miss a show, and it might be months before it aired again. Sometimes the edges of the pages would curl from constant flipping during the week. Kids would dog-ear pages to remember Saturday morning cartoons, while adults marked movie nights. It was common for friends to compare their marked-up copies, trading tips on what not to miss. The smell of the ink and paper became part of the ritual, especially if you bought yours fresh off the grocery store rack. Even the smallest towns had people who swore by it as their TV Bible. TV Guide also featured celebrity interviews, behind-the-scenes articles, and crossword puzzles, making it more than just a schedule. The cover often showcased the biggest stars of the moment, making each issue a mini time capsule. Seeing a fresh one on the coffee table felt like the official start of the week's entertainment. Gas station attendants pumping for you was simply how things worked. You pulled in, rolled down your window, and a uniformed attendant would jog over asking, "Fill her up?" While the tank filled, they might wash your windshield, check your oil, or top off your washer fluid. You sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, listening to the rhythmic click of the pump. Some attendants would chat with you about the weather or local news while they worked. Others moved with silent efficiency, a quick nod the only interaction before sending you on your way. If you were a regular customer, they might know your name and your preferred fuel grade by heart. Kids in the back seat sometimes got free lollipops or stickers as a friendly gesture. In winter, the service was especially appreciated. You never had to step into the cold to get your car ready for the road. It was a small luxury that nobody thought of as luxury. It was just service. In some states, this is still the law, but in most places, self-serve has taken over completely. In the 1970s, though, you never had to leave your car unless you wanted to. Paper boys throwing from bicycles were part of the morning soundtrack in many neighborhoods. Just before dawn, you would hear the faint whir of tires on pavement and the slap of newspapers hitting driveways. The best throws landed neatly on porches. The worst landed in puddles or bushes. Paper boys carried heavy canvas bags slung across their shoulders, pedaling fast to meet their route deadlines. It was a job that demanded grit. Snow, rain, or blazing heat, the papers still had to go out. On weekends, the bags were even heavier with the thick Sunday editions, sometimes nearly toppling the rider. Dogs along the route became familiar characters, some friendly, and others determined to chase. Collecting payment was its own challenge, involving polite knocks, counting change, and keeping track of who still owed. Parents often saw the job as a training ground for responsibility and independence. Collecting payment was part of the job too, knocking on doors and hearing coins jingle into their hands. It was often a kid's first real job, teaching responsibility, time management, and the importance of showing up, rain or shine. Seeing a paper boy pedal away down the block was as ordinary as the sunrise. Drive-up bank windows with pneumatic tubes were as close as the 1970s got to science fiction in everyday life. You would pull up to the curbside lane, roll down your window, and be greeted by a teller's voice crackling over the intercom. In front of you sat a tall, clear plastic tube system, complete with a canister waiting for your cash, checks, or signed deposit slips. You placed everything inside, twisted the lid, and set it in the chute. With a satisfying thunk, the system engaged, and your transaction whooshed away in a rush of air. You could watch it zip through the transparent tubing, taking sharp turns overhead like a tiny roller coaster before disappearing into the building. A moment later, the canister returned, carrying your receipt or cash back with the same space-age flourish. For kids in the passenger seat, this was pure magic, better than a vending machine, because it worked both ways. The novelty never wore off, even for adults. It made banking feel oddly personal and high-tech at the same time, especially when the teller's voice floated through again with a friendly, "Have a nice day." Today's drive-throughs may still exist, but without those humming tubes, they have lost that satisfying, slightly mysterious sense of interaction. Kids walking to school alone was such a standard part of daily life in the 1970s that nobody thought twice about it. Whether you were in first grade or sixth, you knew the route by heart. Down certain streets, past familiar houses, maybe cutting through a field or park to save time. Backpacks were lighter then, often just a few notebooks and a lunchbox, so you could skip along without feeling weighed down. You would meet up with friends along the way, forming little walking groups that expanded as more kids joined in. Crossing guards were stationed at the busiest intersections, but most streets needed no supervision. Parents rarely hovered. They trusted that you would make it there and back. The walk home was just as important, a time to stop for candy at the corner store, linger at the playground, or take the long way just to avoid heading inside too soon. It gave kids independence, exercise, and a connection to their neighborhood that is harder to find today. Back then, the sight of small clusters of children moving like colorful streams toward the schoolyard was just part of the morning landscape. Rotary dial phones in every home were both an essential utility and a tactile experience. The phone was usually anchored to a wall in the kitchen or sitting on a hallway table, connected to a cord that limited how far you could roam. To place a call, you would stick your finger into the numbered hole, rotate the dial until it stopped, then release it and listen to the clicking as it spun back into place. Numbers with lots of nines or zeros meant longer pauses, so dialing could be a small workout. The sound of the dial whirring and the satisfying stop at the end of each rotation was part of the ritual. Phones came in a rainbow of colors: avocado green, harvest gold, princess pink, matching the decor of the room. The coiled cord inevitably twisted into knots, forcing you to dangle the handset to untangle it. Calling was more deliberate. You had to know the number by memory or check the list taped to the fridge. If someone else was already on the line, you simply waited your turn. There was a patience built into the process, and a physicality that made every call feel just a little more intentional. Public libraries with card catalog drawers were the beating heart of knowledge before search engines existed. The catalogs were long wooden cabinets filled with dozens of small drawers, each one crammed with neatly typed index cards. Every card contained an author's name, a title, or a subject, along with the sacred Dewey Decimal number. The drawers slid out with a smooth wooden glide, and you would thumb through hundreds of cards to find the one you needed. Sometimes you would stumble upon something entirely unexpected, a book you never knew existed, just by flipping past it. There was a quiet satisfaction in finding the right card, committing the number to memory, and heading off into the stacks like a treasure hunt. The smell of the cards was its own mix of paper, ink, and polished wood. Libraries were quieter then, filled with the faint sound of drawers opening and closing. Every search felt like a small adventure, requiring patience, focus, and a willingness to browse beyond what you came for. It was a slower, more deliberate way of finding information, and the drawers themselves felt like pieces of fine furniture, as much a part of the library's soul as the books on the shelves. Home movie nights with a 16mm projector were a special kind of family gathering. The projector would be set up in the living room, its heavy metal body clunking as it was carried in from the closet. A white screen, or just a blank wall, served as the backdrop. Threading the film through the machine was a careful process, guiding it past spools and sprockets until it was ready to roll. The moment the switch flipped, the projector came alive with a loud whir, the film's faint smell of celluloid filling the air. Images flickered to life, sometimes home movies, sometimes rented reels of cartoons or old Hollywood classics. The room would darken, the light beam cutting through a faint haze of dust. Family members sprawled on the floor or curled up on couches, watching the slightly grainy images dance on the screen. There were often skips or breaks in the film, leading to quick pauses for repair with a bit of tape. When it was over, the film was rewound by hand, the reels clicking softly as they spun. It was a ritual that combined effort, anticipation, and shared experience, one that made the act of watching feel just as important as the movie itself. Backyard fun in the 1970s was loud, chaotic, and often a little dangerous. Enter the water wiggle. It looked innocent enough, a smiling plastic head connected to a long hose. But the moment the water was turned on, it became a wild, whipping, serpentine menace. It sprayed water in every direction and flailed unpredictably, turning the yard into a circus of screams and soaked clothes. Kids chased it. It chased them back. You never knew where it would go. One second it was dancing in the air. The next it was smacking you in the shins. It had one job: to create watery mayhem, and it was great at it. Parents watched from porches, laughing or nervously sipping iced tea. Some turned the pressure down, others cranked it up. Either way, you ended up drenched. There were no safety labels or slow modes, just you, the hose, and the wiggling chaos that could knock over toddlers and send dogs running. It was thrilling, it was unpredictable, and it was absolutely beloved. They do not make toys like that anymore, probably for good reason. But those summer afternoons when laughter mixed with shrieks and the sprinkler twisted through the air like a possessed noodle, those are hard to forget. You ever hold a notebook and feel like it was burning your hands? That was a slam book. It looked innocent. Lined paper, spiral binding, maybe a few stickers. But inside, chaos. Questions like, who's the cutest? Who has the worst breath? What's your biggest secret? Filled every page. And the answers? Anonymous. Or so we said. You knew who wrote what. You always knew. It was petty and thrilling, like a middle school soap opera you could carry in your backpack. Every page turned felt like peeling back the layers of someone's real thoughts, sometimes yours. Passing that book around during lunch or between classes felt like handling a live bomb. One wrong answer, and friendships were over. But you still read every page. You had to, even if it hurt, even if it was about you, especially if it was about you. And if your crush wrote something about someone else? Heartbreak, right there in blue ink. Slam books were messy, mean, and magnetic. They lived in backpacks and lockers and sometimes disappeared for weeks, only to reappear with 20 new entries. Teachers hated them. Parents feared them. But for a moment, they were everything. They held the drama of a whole semester. You remember this. Operation was not just a game, it was a test of nerves. Released by Milton Bradley in 1965, this battery-operated board game turned you into a surgeon, operating on a cartoonish patient named Cavity Sam. He lay there in his hospital gown, wide-eyed and helpless, with little cavities holding ailments like a funny bone, a wishbone, or a Charlie horse. The goal? Use tweezers to remove each piece without touching the metal edges of the cavity. If you slipped even slightly, the board buzzed loudly and Sam's red nose lit up. That buzz? It haunted dreams. Kids would wince, laugh, and shout all at once. The challenge was as much about steady hands as it was about keeping calm under pressure. Operation was competitive, silly, and oddly tense. You might remember tilting the board to cheat or holding your breath during a particularly tricky extraction. It was often pulled out during family game night, and even adults found themselves sweating over the tiny butterfly in the stomach. Operation was more than a toy. It was an experience, a rite of passage, and the first time many kids learned that success sometimes comes down to keeping a steady hand. The echo of wheels on polished floors, the scent of popcorn and sweat and disco, neon lights bouncing off mirrored balls. In the 1970s, roller rinks were not just hangout spots, they were kingdoms, and your skates were your crown. Friday night meant meeting your friends, lacing up, and entering a world where rhythm ruled. You danced on wheels, you fell, laughed, and got back up. There were couples-only skates, awkward slow songs, and bathroom mirrors filled with clouded hairspray. Everyone had a favorite song, a favorite move, and maybe someone they hoped would notice them under the flashing lights. Outside, the world was growing fast, politics, pressure, and bills. But inside the rink, time paused. Skateboarding had its own revolution. Empty swimming pools turned into canvases. Suburbs became skate parks. Kids carved out space for themselves, literally, where none existed, and no one asked permission. Today, skating exists, but it is not the heartbeat it once was. The culture is fractured, the space is fewer. But once, it was everything. It was freedom on four wheels. It was belonging without needing to say a word. Do you remember the feeling of flying just for a minute on a stretch of waxed floor with the music loud and the world far away? Before microwaves took over the world, there was Jiffy Pop. That iconic silver foil pan with the wire handle looked more like a science experiment than a snack. You placed it over the burner, turned the heat to medium, and waited. First, nothing. Then a rustle. Then a pop. Then a full-on explosion of sound as the silver dome started to rise. It puffed up like magic, growing rounder and louder until it looked like a shiny balloon about to burst. You shook the handle gently, trying not to burn the bottom. The anticipation was everything. Kids gathered around the stove like it was a campfire. Parents pretended not to worry, it might go up in flames. And then it was done. You tore open the top and reached inside, burning your fingers on the edge, of course, for a handful of hot, buttery popcorn. It did not matter if half of it was burnt and the other half still kernels. It was the experience, the ritual. The popcorn was secondary. The fun was in the show. Jiffy Pop was not just a snack. It was a performance. And if you ever had a movie night that started with that sizzling silver pan, you remember the thrill of the balloon. Ice cubes were once a challenge, not a luxury. If you grew up with metal ice cube trays, The phone book was not just a book. It was a beast. Heavy, yellow-paged, and full of the names of people you barely knew but somehow still had to call. You flipped through it to find the pizza place, the hardware store, or your cousin's new number. You needed to know how to spell their last name, or at least get close. There were no search bars, no filters, just fingers, pages, and luck. You hoped they were listed. If they were not, too bad. Time to ask your neighbor. If they were, it was like winning the lottery. Found it, got it, call made. And businesses? They fought to be first. That is why half the companies were named AAA something. It was not clever. It was strategic. And if you wanted to look up someone in another city, you had to call information or find the right regional book. Stacks of them sat by the phone like encyclopedias of everyone you might need. Even the feel of the paper was unique, slightly rough with ink that smeared if your fingers were wet. Flipping those pages felt like doing something, like being capable of solving a small mystery with just a name and a guess. Your parents used them, you used them, it was normal. Until it wasn't. If you remember dragging a chair across the floor just to reach the phone book drawer, you remember this. Barrel of Monkeys was proof that the simplest ideas can last the longest. Released in 1965, the game came in a bright plastic barrel filled with plastic monkeys that linked together by their arms. That was it. No batteries, no board, no setup time. Just spill the monkeys and try to link as many as you could without dropping the chain. It was harder than it looked. The curved arms never seemed to hook just right, and one wrong move could send your whole line tumbling. But when you did it, when you made it past 10 or 15 monkeys, it felt like a small miracle. Kids would challenge each other to beat their records, dump and restart over and over, totally absorbed. The monkeys themselves were colorful, cheerful, and perfectly palm-sized. The game traveled well. It lived in car glove boxes, grandma's house drawers, and birthday party goodie bags. Decades later, the design remains almost unchanged, which says something about how right they got it the first time. Before screens took over fidget time, there was just you, a barrel, and 24 tiny monkeys daring you to beat your best. Once upon a time, thumbing a ride was just another way to get around. You stuck out your arm, trusted a stranger, and ended up somewhere new. In the 1970s, hitchhiking was woven into the fabric of American youth culture. It was impulsive, bold, and strangely ordinary. Backpackers with handwritten cardboard signs, college students heading home for the weekend, young dreamers chasing concerts, freedom, or just a place to sleep that night. The road was a friend, not a threat. Of course, it came with risk, but so did living. Trust was the currency of the era. You paid with eye contact, conversation, and the silent agreement that we were all just trying to get somewhere. Today, the idea seems reckless, dangerous, unthinkable. Our paranoia has grown louder than our sense of community. Stories of harm and headlines of fear took the wheel, and the open road became a closed door. But ask anyone who stuck out their thumb back then, and they will tell you about the kindness of strangers, the rides that turned into friendships, and the way the world felt a little more connected. Hitchhiking was not just transportation. It was a dare, a freedom, and a story you told for the rest of your life. The kitchen of the 1970s did not just serve food, it made a statement. And that statement was harvest gold and avocado green. These two colors dominated every American kitchen appliance. Your refrigerator, your stove, even your blender wore these colors like a uniform. It was not just paint, it was identity. These colors were supposed to represent nature, health, and a touch of luxury. Harvest gold had a warm golden glow that felt like sunlight. Avocado green was earthy and bold, a perfect match for the indoor plant movement and natural fiber craze of the time. But somewhere along the way, the trend turned into a punchline. Yet, for those who lived it, there is no forgetting. You remember the heavy click of the fridge door, the way the green surface reflected your face in the oven window, the hum of the blender making root beer floats. These were not sleek or modern. They were sturdy, reliable, and filled with the smells of Sunday dinners and burnt toast. Maybe you were not fond of these colors as a kid. Maybe you even hated them. But when you see them now, something deep inside stirs. They are more than colors. They are the palette of your childhood. You made plans, and you showed up. That was it. No text to say, "on my way." No last-minute voice message. No constant back and forth. You said, "Meet me at the park at 4." And you meant it. People showed up when they said they would, or they did not. And if they did not, you waited. Maybe you gave them 15 minutes, maybe more. But you waited. And somehow, the world kept turning. There was no checking their location or asking if they were ghosting you. It was just part of life. If you got stood up, you called them later and asked what happened. Or maybe you didn't. Maybe you just moved on. A promise meant something, even if it was made on a Tuesday afternoon with a backpack slung over one shoulder. Plans were not just made, they were believed. Plans had weight because there was no safety net. You couldn't bail out with a message. If you forgot, you forgot. If you missed it, you missed it. You trusted each other. Or you didn't. And either way, that was the lesson. We planned with our voices and remembered with our minds. People showed up not because they were reminded, but because they cared. You remember this. Hot Wheels did not just roll, they roared. When Mattel launched the line in 1968, it changed the way kids thought about toy cars. These were not slow, blocky replicas. Hot Wheels were sleek, bright, and built to race. The original 16 models included muscle cars, hot rods, and custom builds with names like Beatnik Bandit and Diora. They had real speed thanks to low-friction wheels and metal axles. But the real magic came when you laid down that iconic orange track. Loops, curves, jumps. Suddenly, your hallway became Daytona. Kids spent hours building elaborate courses from couches to floorboards to staircases. Some cars went so fast they hit the baseboard and flipped into the next room. The cars were pocket-sized, but they carried the weight of imagination. Each new release felt like a discovery. Paint jobs were wild, details were sharp. Collectors started forming almost immediately. And while other toy cars looked good sitting still, Hot Wheels looked best in motion, blurring by in a flash of chrome and flame decals. For many, it was not just about racing. It was about building your own world, one piece of orange track at a time. Nature was not an excursion. It was your backyard, your escape, your everyday. In the 1970s, kids built forts in the woods, caught frogs in creeks, and came home with dirt under every nail. You did not need a guidebook or a permit. You just went. Parents did not ask where, and you would not have known how to answer anyway. You were not trying to get grounded. You were already in the ground. Climbing trees, jumping rocks, wading through poison ivy without a second thought. Nature was not a classroom. It was a kingdom. No sunscreen, no hydration plan, just freedom. Exploration was a birthright, not a weekend event, and it built something in us. Resilience, curiosity, respect. Today, access to nature feels like a luxury. Locked gates, expensive gear, screens that convince us we have seen it all. But nothing replaces the smell of wet soil after rain, the sound of wind in tall grass, the feeling that you are the only person for miles, and maybe, for a moment, you were. In the 1970s, getting a TV signal felt like summoning the spirits. You did not just turn on the television and sit back, you had to work for it. That meant rabbit ears. That meant stretching, adjusting, and holding metal rods in every direction. And when the fuzz would not go away, there was only one solution: tinfoil. It crinkled, it sparkled, and somehow it worked. Wrapped like a desperate science experiment, your television antenna became a sculpture of hope and frustration. You might remember your sibling being the designated antenna holder, standing on one leg, arm raised, frozen in place while the rest of the family watched. It was trial and error, comedy, and chaos. The goal? A clear picture, even if it only lasted 5 minutes. There were always threats not to move, begging someone not to breathe too hard, cheering when the static cleared, booing when it came back. It was not just about the picture, it was about the ritual, the teamwork, the sacrifice. You learned patience, you learned creativity. You learned that a ball of tinfoil could mean the difference between watching your favorite show or sitting in silence. It was frustrating, ridiculous, and completely unforgettable. Before phones, we had static. Walkie-talkies were our lifelines, our secret weapons, our two-way tickets to mischief. You pressed the button and whispered "over" like it was a military operation. Half the time, the signal barely reached down the block. But that did not matter, because for a few glorious minutes, you and your best friend were spies, explorers, or cops on patrol. You used code names. You used made-up slang. You hid in bushes and whispered mission updates. And when your batteries started to die, that fading buzz made everything feel urgent. Sometimes you just said dumb stuff to hear it echo through the air. Do you copy? Yeah, I copy. And then you would both laugh like it was the funniest thing in the world. Interference was part of the fun. Static, weird radio bleed-in, mystery voices, it all added to the magic. You kept the walkie in your pocket, clipped to your belt or under your pillow at night just in case. They were bulky, battery hungry and barely functional. But they were yours. And in that moment, nothing beat pushing that talk button and knowing someone was out there, listening. You remember this. TV dinners turned the living room into a dining room, one foil tray at a time. They were not new in the 1960s, but this was the decade they really took off, just as television became the centerpiece of American family life. You got a little compartment for meatloaf, one for mashed potatoes, another for corn, maybe a brownie tucked into the corner. All you had to do was pop it in the oven, wait, and serve. No planning, no cleanup, no arguing over what to cook. The tray itself felt futuristic. Everything had its place. The food was not gourmet, but it was warm, salty, and comforting in its predictability. Families could eat while watching their favorite shows. Kids could feel like grown-ups with their own personal meal. The appeal was clear, fast, easy, and made to match the rhythm of modern life. TV dinners were more than just food. They were a new way to eat, one that said it was okay to sit on the couch and focus on The Ed Sullivan Show or Bonanza. The clang of a fork against aluminum still echoes in memory. For many, it was the sound of dinner and television becoming one. It is easy to forget, but there was a time when the scent of smoke lingered in every diner booth, airport lounge, and grocery store checkout line. In the 1970s, smoking was not just allowed, it was expected. Businessmen lit up during meetings. Teenagers passed cigarettes behind school gyms. Ashtrays were on every table, every dashboard, every teacher's desk. It was part of the culture, the aesthetic, the identity. Movie stars smoked, politicians smoked. Your parents probably did too. No one flinched. No one asked you to step outside. It was just part of the air. Of course, we know better now. Health campaigns, lawsuits, and personal tragedies painted a much different picture. But the freedom itself, the choice to smoke when and where you pleased, that was real. It was tied to personal liberty, to adulthood, to rebellion. And when it disappeared, it did not go quietly. Today, you light a cigarette and you are met with side eyes, signage, and social judgment. We traded smoke for safety, but also for surveillance. Back then, you could light up and feel cool, in control, and slightly defiant. Maybe that is what we really miss, the ability to make a bad choice without being watched. Pop beads were not just a craft, they were a lifestyle. These chunky, colorful plastic beads snapped together with a satisfying click, turning into necklaces, bracelets, tiaras, or anything else your imagination dreamed up. Every little girl had a box of them. Every slumber party included at least one fashion show. But pop beads were more than accessories. They were building blocks. They were puzzles. They were surprisingly strong and endlessly versatile. You could pull them apart to start over or wear your creation all day like it was made of gold. They came in every color of the rainbow. Some were clear, some were glittery, some looked like tiny candies. And yes, sometimes you chewed on them even though you were not supposed to. Sometimes they turned into weapons, flicked across the room or used to bind your younger sibling. That was half the fun. Pop beads were part toy, part rebellion. They made you feel creative, independent, grown up even, until one popped off and vanished under the couch, never to be seen again. You always lost one, but the set never felt incomplete. You just made a shorter necklace. Pop beads were a rite of passage in childhood, bright, noisy, and totally unforgettable. There was no group chat, no endless scrolling. If you wanted to be social, you went to the mall. That was the rule. You got dropped off with $10, maybe $20 if your parents were feeling generous, and you made it last. You walked in with your friends, hit the food court, then circled back 3 more times like it was some sort of sacred ritual. You did not need a plan, just vibes. Sometimes you bought nothing. Sometimes you bought pretzels and a $5 necklace that turned your neck green. That was the mall experience. Arcades, music stores, that one kiosk with lava lamps and mood rings. Everything smelled like cinnamon and new clothes. You tried on outfits you could not afford, sprayed too much cologne at the tester wall, and took glamour shots in the photo booth. You checked out the cute kids from school and hoped they saw you first. It was freedom and boredom rolled into one. You spent hours doing absolutely nothing, and it was perfect. Your ride came at 6, and when the car pulled up, you swore you had not been there that long. But you had, and you loved every minute of it. You remember this. G.I. Joe changed everything the moment he marched onto toy shelves in 1964. Marketed not as a doll, but as an action figure, he offered boys the same kind of character-driven play that girls had with Barbie, but with a combat boot twist. The original 12-inch figure came with a military uniform, dog tags, and enough flexibility to strike a pose or take a fall. Kids could swap out his gear, helmets, rifles, backpacks, even scuba suits, and send him off on missions across the living room or backyard battlefield. It was the height of the Cold War, and Joe reflected that tension, but filtered through a child's sense of adventure. Over time, he evolved into a whole universe of characters, vehicles, and storylines. But those first editions were pure, iconic, and endlessly played with. G.I. Joe was a soldier, a sailor, an adventurer. He climbed trees, dove into mud puddles, and slept in shoebox barracks. For many boys growing up in the 1960s, he was the first toy that truly felt like theirs. He was more than plastic. He was valor, imagination, and action rolled into one heroic pose. And every kid who owned one remembers how it felt to gear him up for battle. In 1971, a line was redrawn, not with a pen, but with a promise. The 26th Amendment lowered the voting age to 18, and just like that, an entire generation found its voice. These were not just young people. They were drafted soldiers, college kids dodging tear gas, teenagers watching the world split open on television. And finally, someone said, "If you are old enough to die for your country, you are old enough to vote in it." The freedom hit hard. It meant something. It was a shift that crackled with urgency and anger and hope. Youth engagement exploded. Political debates moved into high schools. Campaign buttons were pinned next to denim patches and peace signs. And for once, the future was not just talked about. It was shaped by those who would live it. Fast forward to now, and voting feels like a chore to some, a broken system to others. But back then, it was power. It was a statement. It was yours. We forget that this right was not handed down gently. It was fought for, protested for, demanded. And when it finally came, it did not just change ballots. It changed how a generation saw itself. 18 used to mean something more than college applications and student loans. It meant change. It meant your voice finally counted. What happened to that fire? Playgrounds used to be a little more dangerous, and the metal slide on asphalt was the crown jewel of poor design. In the 1970s, nearly every school or park had one. It stood tall, often 2 stories high, baking in the sun until it could sear the back of your legs. No shade, no padding, just you, gravity, and a prayer. The steps up were made of thin metal bars. The top had no real guardrails, and when you slid down, you hit that blacktop like a dropped steak. But we lined up for it anyway, over and over. There was something thrilling about the danger. It was a rite of passage, a fast, hot, jolting ride that ended in a dusty scrape or bruised elbow. Teachers watched from afar. Parents shrugged. Kids were expected to bounce back. If you made it to the bottom without a scream, you earned bragging rights. If you got burned, you wore it like a badge. Safety standards have come a long way since then, but so much of that fearless, feral childhood play was tied to moments like these. Today, it is hard to believe we once thought that was normal, but deep down, part of us misses it. There was a time when we were all human contact lists. You knew your home number, your best friend's number, your crush's number, and the pizza place 2 blocks over. You had to. There was no look it up button or digital backup. Your brain was the backup. If you were really serious, you wrote it all in a little address book, one with bent corners and ink smudges that lived near the phone. But more often, those numbers lived in your head. You dialed them so many times, your fingers moved on their own. The sound of the rotary wheel spinning or the soft push of plastic buttons was just part of daily life. Mess up one number and you had to start over. No backspace. Just hang up and redial. And then there were the area codes. You only used them when calling outside your town. Otherwise, it was 7 digits and go. You did not just know numbers, you felt them. Your fingers remembered the motion on the keypad like muscle memory, like dialing was its own kind of language. Kids these days do not get it. Ask them their mom's number and they stare blankly like you just asked them for their social security number. But back then, you knew who to call and when. There was no guesswork, no "who's this?" on the other line. Just voices, time, and memory. You remember the rhythm of each number like a melody only you could play. And if you still remember at least one phone number from your childhood, you definitely remember this. So, which of these vanished 70s habits do you secretly wish would make a comeback? Share your pick in the comments, hit like if it brought the memories rushing back, and subscribe so you never miss our next deep dive into the past.